Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. My name is John Dallas. For the public record, my name is John Dallas, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We also have a team of folks working to ensure this meeting runs smoothly for us in the room and those listening online. As we continue to meet in person, all committee members are required to be physically present here in MetroPlan Orlando boardroom for purposes of achieving a quorum. Staff will continue to stream our meetings online for public access. Please, a couple things right before we get going. Please silence your phones if they are. Make sure mine is. We also ask committee members to wait to be recognized to speak and to activate your microphones before speaking and turning them back off when you are complete. There are two public comment points in the meeting. The first is for action items, and the second is for comments of a general nature. You may provide your public comment in person, virtually, over Zoom, or in advance by email or phone message. We want this in all future meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact MetroPlan. And for our agenda review, Ms. Larson.
Good morning, Mayor and committee members. I just have a couple short announcements this morning. No changes to the agenda. So first off, as a reminder, the MTP 2050 Summit will be Wednesday, April 9th at the Lake Mary Event Center. And this meeting will bring together the MetroPlan Orlando Board and advisory committees for a joint discussion on funding scenarios for the 2050 plan. You kind of got a preview of that during our last meeting. But just a reminder that this is going to be an important group discussion and a chance for the board and committee members to provide feedback and recommendations on the ever important discussion of funding. So please make plans to attend in person. And also note that the MTP technical workshop on April 10th is still scheduled. So if you plan to attend that, and that's always virtual. Next, applications for COMPTO, which is the Conference on Minority Transportation Officials 2025 Careers in Transportation for City Youth. Internship program is now open for students and host agencies. So COMPTO is the leading national advocate for the transportation industry that serves all communities, advancing and training professionals to ensure a highly skilled workforce that promotes internships for the next generation of transportation leaders. If your city or town municipality is looking to be a host agency, you can there's information on applications at the table at the boardroom. You can also ask Eric Hill of our staff for more information. And then also we are having a webinar on Wednesday, March 19th. This is a presentation from our own Mike Wilson on bicycling. Mike's presentation will cover factors that affect bicycle transportation, crash data, and risk factors with special attention to bicyclist speed as a risk factor and strategies for reducing bicycle crash risk. This webinar has been crafted for the CAC, but we're extending an invitation to all of our advisory committees and anyone who may be interested. And we've informed the TAC also. So your staff has been recommended this webinar also. All right. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mike for the safety moment.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Also want to mention that that webinar is basically an expansion of a presentation I gave to this committee a few months ago, probably double in length, more detail. So a lot of familiar information that you would, if you were to watch it again. Moving on to safety moment. March is Florida Bicycle Month. Nationally, it's May, but in Florida, we like to move it up a little bit for the cooler time of the year. And so I want to talk about this time around about lights at night. It's a really important element of cyclist safety. About a quarter of bicyclist travel happens at night, but over half of our bicyclist fatalities do. And nearly 3/4 of the overtaking crash fatalities are at night. The risk that nighttime travel adds for fatal and serious crashes is 5 times greater compared to daytime when we're talking about overtaking crashes. Looking at our trend data, some concerning numbers here. If you see here that we've got daytime crashes up by 10% and serious crashes up by 4%, while nighttime are up nearly 40% and a quarter for those same levels. I suspect this has to do with e-bikes, but we'll have a better idea when we get more data in the coming year. We'll be able to get a little more fine-grained on that analysis with some changes to our crash type system. So how do we, as road users, prevent nighttime crashes? Well, from a bicycling standpoint, headlights and taillights are essential and they're required by law. Reflectors can only work when they are in front of the vehicle, in front of the headlights. So a bicyclist has to have a headlight in order to be seen from the side. The vast majority of crashes involve a cyclist who is not in front of the vehicle until a moment before impact. So a headlight is essential. When it comes to a taillight, it's really important to mount it to the bicycle and not to your clothing or something fabric. It needs to be on a nice rigid mount so that it can be pointed straight back to maximize the amount of light that gets to the driver's eyes. That concludes my safety moment and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All right, this
Oh, I
concludes.
got one
oh,
question. Is that
okay.
something y'all are looking at in the future? Is to do a study on e-bikes and the safety of e-bikes?
Yes, so we're waiting on an update of what we call our crash typing system, which is part of the state crash database. We're crash typing specifically for bicycle and pedestrian crashes. And so that update will enable us to better differentiate between e-bikes, regular bikes, and other micromobility modes so that we can get a better handle on the different factors and crash causes to compare e-bikes, for example, compared to regular bicycles.
So, I mean, so you're saying in the future you will separate those from regular bicycles?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, Scott, you might have one more.
I'm sorry, I was thinking, are these packaged or could they be packaged and distributed in a way that in our commission meeting announcements, we could rebroadcast?
Yeah, that's something.
The safety moment.
The safety
Yeah,
moment.
as part of Vision Zero or something to get a broader audience.
Sure. I think a simple way would we could clip them out of the YouTube videos of our but yeah, and that's something we've talked about too, is how do we convert these safety moments into more of a regular packaged message for the general public. Yeah. Right.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll now go to agency partner reports, and if we will hear from FDOT, Mr. Scar. Welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Good morning, committee members. A few updates for you this morning. If you weren't aware, currently in Seminole County, there's a ribbon cutting going on this morning in downtown Oviedo for State Route 426, County Road 419. That was a widening project, so it's happening in conjunction with this meeting. There are 2 public meetings coming up in the month. One's actually happening tonight, the resurfacing and pavement restoration of Sand Lake Road from Orange Blossom Trail to Orange Avenue. Project limits are from East Orange Blossom Trail to Orange Avenue, State Route 527 in Orange County. And that's tonight at 5:30 to 7. Location is the Art of Random Kindness, 2352 West Oak Ridge Road in Orlando. And again, with both of these events, if you can't attend in person, you can always use the CFO Roads option. And I have project numbers if you're interested, and you can look it up, and following the day of the event, you can see presentations as well as some of the information that was passed if you're curious. The second event will be the resurfacing of State Road 530 from west of State Road 429 to Reedy Creek Bridge. This project will also include upgrades to pedestrian curb ramps in accordance with ADA current standards. And that is Wednesday, March 12th, 5:30 to 7 again. Location is Orange Lake Golf Resort, Wilson Palmer Room, 12397 Legends Drive in Kissimmee, Florida. And same rules apply as the first project, if you have interest. I wanted to bring you a couple of updates from the safety office. In the 9 counties that make up the FDOT District 5, 24, we saw a 15% decrease in fatalities compared to the previous year. And that represents over 110 lives saved. And it's also an encouraging reminder of the impact that we can have when we work together and the incredible work that's being done across Central Florida. The secondary question that always comes up with that is, well, what are the contributing factors? And some of that data is being teased out a little bit, but we did a lot of messaging over the last year, and we like to think that that's related, to some of the behaviors that we see taking place in Central Florida. An event I'd like to invite you to is the Central Florida Inaugural Transportation Industry Hiring Event. That'll take place Wednesday, 30 April from 3 to 7 in Osceola Heritage Park. We have a flyer for distribution if you're interested or any of your folks are interested. And in closing, the FDOT Central Florida Safety Summit, this will be our second annual safety summit. That occurs Friday, May 9th from 10 to 2 p.m. And the location is the International Speedway. And if you have interest in attending that, you can contact myself or Lorene Bobo within the district. And pending comments, that concludes my update this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scarf. Any questions? All right, great. Next up, we have from Lynx, Ms. Witten. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Just a few quick updates. We have a new high ridership day. That was February 11th, 71,780 riders. So pretty close to our pre-COVID numbers. Right now, the average, we are recovered about 76% of pre-pandemic ridership. Our bus operators, paratransit operators, and maintenance team competed in the state bus rodeo. And our maintenance team won, and will be going on to Austin, Texas to represent the state of Florida in the International American Public Transportation Association Bus Rodeo. And then lastly, Lynx, the local chapter of the American Heart Association and Advent Health, had an event on February 21st, and we deployed AEDs on the limo buses downtown. We know they're on the train now, but as far as we know, we're the first public bus to have portable AEDs available on the bus. Unless there's any comments, that concludes my report.
Any questions for Lynx? No? All right. And just in time, we have Mr. Fine coming in, and now from the Florida Turnpike Enterprise. And if you are ready, Mr. Fine, welcome. Floor is yours. Or I can come back after roll.
I'll just gonna.
Okay.
So good morning, committee members. One quick update. Florida Turnpike Enterprise. Oh man, let me catch my breath. Ooh. Is holding a public information meeting for the PD&E for the Turnpike Mainline widening from State Road 60 to Clay Whaley Road. So this Tuesday, the virtual public information meeting was held at 5:30 p.m. Also yesterday, the in-person public information meeting was held at the St. Cloud Community Center in St. Cloud, Florida at 5:30 p.m. So another in-person public information meeting session will be held at the Intergenerational Recreation Center in Vero Beach on March 11th at 5:30 p.m. And registration for next week's session can be completed at floridasturnpike.com. And also project information is available at www.turnpikesr60 to cwr.com. But with that being said, that is the end of my report.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Fine? All right, thank you very much. Next, we are going to the roll call. Ms. Smith.
Good morning. I'll ask all committee members to keep your microphones muted until called. Please say here or present. Davitt,
Here.
Sullivan for DeCiccio,
Present.
Dallas,
Present.
Bobrowski for Foraker,
Present.
Gardner, Guthrie,
Present.
Henson,
Here.
Kennedy,
Here.
McCann, Ramos, Sackett, Slated, Colbert for Smith.
Here.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the roll call, and we do have a quorum physically present. And we have requests for excused absences from Commissioner Brian Sackett with the City of Longwood and Mayor Megan Slatic from the City of Oviedo.
Do we have a motion to approve absences,
So moved.
excuse? Mayor Henson, do we have a second? Second, Commissioner Davitt, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, please show that adopted. Thank you very much. All right, for public comments, we will now hear public comments on action items. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold public comments to 2 minutes or less. If any members of the public wish to comment and are joining us virtually, please use the raise hand function and you will be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll send you a prompt to unmute your mic. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact Metro Plan Orlando. Do we have anyone joining us virtually?
No hands raised online, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do we have any members of the public attending in person that wish to make a public comment?
No requests.
And are there any written comments?
There,
All right. So we will go right into the action items. First, we need to approve the February minutes. Are there any changes or corrections? Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes as presented.
Mayor Henson moved approval. Second. We have a second. Second from Commissioner Sullivan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, please show that adopted. All right, now we're going to go into, we have 4 informational presentations today. The first one is MPO planning process for 2025. Mr. Trauger, welcome.
Presentation is intentionally quick today. It's really more of a heads up. I know we have a lot of new members who probably were not on the Municipal Advisory Committee back in 2019, 2020, when we were going through some major updates to some of our core products. So just kind of wanted to walk you through. You've heard a lot about our long-range plan, our metropolitan transportation plan. You're going to hear a lot more about that today from Taylor. She's up next. But we also have 2 other core products that have to be updated annually. Our prioritized project list, as well as our transportation improvement program. These are items that, as I mentioned, we revisit annually based on changes in the budget. And as it relates to the transportation improvement program, it's a rolling 5-year budget. So we're always adding that next 5th year. So that's done annually. But as I mentioned before, our long-range plan, our metropolitan transportation plan, is only updated every 5 years. And this is that 1 out of every 5 years where we're updating all 3 core products in 1 calendar year. So I just wanted to kind of walk you through what that's going to look like as it relates to your board, as it relates to your agenda items and specific to action items. Give you a heads up, you'll be hearing a lot more about this from my team over the next couple months, but wanted to put it on your radar today. So here we are, we get 8 meetings with you a year, so we try to make the most of those. The next time we come together will be in May as it relates to the Municipal Advisory Committee. You'll hear status updates on both what we're up to as it relates to the prioritized project list and some of our other core product updates. But you'll see actual tangible draft a tangible draft of our prioritized project list and transportation improvement when you come to that meeting in May. You'll have a presentation from my team. And then you'll take action on those documents at your next meeting in July. Those documents really align with, as noted here on the slide, the changes that are reflected in the FDOT tentative work program. So DOT came in last cycle, told you a little bit about what's in, what's out, the circumstances surrounding the work program and kind of working within finite funds. So those documents will be representative of those changes that are currently shown in that work program as it comes out of the legislative session. And then we're going to go into the fall. At the end of the year, this is where you're going to hear a lot. You're going to hear about the long range plan at every meeting, but this is where you're going to see tangible products, where you'll see projects, what we can afford, what's under that budgetary line, and you'll start seeing those more detailed presentations at kind of in the August timeframe. But then in December, all of our committees come together And we'll be requesting your approval, the adoption of that 2050 plan at your December meeting. So again, this is just putting everything on the radar. You're going to hear a lot more about, especially the 2050 plan over the course of this year. But with that, as I mentioned in prior slides, we're going to be hearing a lot more about the long range plan, but as it relates to the TIP and our transportation improvement program and our prioritized project list, we're really bracing based on kind of economic and other kind of financial circumstances, the projects, trying to maintain those existing projects, stabilize the work program. So basically making minor updates, but I don't think we'll be adding too much new, just based on the limited funding that we have available to us. So with that, I'll take any questions, but like I said, Taylor's up next if you have anything on the 2050 MTP. Yes, sir.
Could you, if there are going to be any changes, whether projects are going to be eliminated or if the plan is going to be amended, at what point before they gets too far down the road, we want to make sure we have input if it affects our area. What's the best way we can do that?
So we'll let you know of that. That will be in that preview. Let me go back a couple here. So when we go back, so as it relates to changes to the prioritized project list, early May, that's where we'll start identifying what's changed in general. So you'll get that preview before we take action. And we work closely with your staffs to make sure that fine tuning is taking place and that it aligns with other local policies and your capital improvement programs as well.
Very good. Any questions? All right, thanks very much. And next we have the status update 2050 MTP, and Ms. Laurent, welcome.
All right, good morning, everyone. So while Alex's presentation was short, I'm going to be up here a little while. So as Alex was just explaining, this year's process is really going to be focused on our core products. And as we work together to build consensus on the 2050 MTP by December of this year, these updates that you get from me are going to switch from being more breadth focused about the quantity of work that we're doing to depth and deep dive items where we're looking directly for your feedback to help guide the development of the 2050 plan. So information about the breadth of work that is ongoing in the background will continue to be included in your agenda packets through those status updates that you've received since we started this back in January of last year. That includes the technical elements that are ongoing, as well as summaries of our public engagement results and the feedback that we're receiving. So if you do have any questions about any of those items, do let us know. So as we discussed at your last meeting, we're at an inflection point with the development of the 2050 MTP, and we're on the precipice of developing our funding scenarios. So to be able to do that, we need to set the stage with 4 key items. The first is a completed needs assessment, what you usually hear me refer to as our transportation to-do list within our region. From there, we need to know what order we're going to address those projects within our region, and that's where we are applying the prioritization methodology that we developed collaboratively last year. So we know how we're going to address those projects. And we also need to know our budgetary control totals. So how much money do we have to be able to advance those projects and get them implemented? And then our 4th item is the funding policy. And this is our guide to be able to help us know how we're going to spend the limited funds available within our region programmatically. We have these first 3 items completed, and today we're going to be focusing on that last item of funding policy. So the funding scenarios themselves, the purpose of them is to evaluate how changes in funding allocations change the transportation projects that are funded within our region. As we develop different scenarios, we are going to be reviewing tangible comparisons between them so we can see the implications of choosing one scenario versus another and work towards building consensus on a preferred scenario. So there will be several iterations that we talk about this year. So we can use that final preferred scenario as the cost feasible plan for the 2050 MTP. So out of all the scenarios that we are going to look at this calendar year, they all need to do 3 things at a minimum. The first is support the 2050 MTP goals that we developed collaboratively last year, help us achieve our regional performance measures, which you just took action on at your last meeting, and then provide flexibility to be able to adapt over time as trends and technology continue to evolve. I know we're all very familiar that transportation projects are funded from a variety of sources, from federal, state, local, and toll funding, depending on the facility. But as we look to develop our funding scenarios, we are going to be focusing on a portion of that federal funding category, and that is the urban attributable TMA funds for our metropolitan area. You will hear me refer to those in shorthand as MPO funds, because those are the funds for which we have programming authority. The current funding policy that we have was the preferred funding scenario from the 2045 MTP, and it is based on those urban attributable TMA or MPO funds that we were just discussing, and does not include state, local, or toll funds. So the funding policy divides those TMA funds across 4 different categories. And as you can see on the screen, each of those different categories, from complete streets, transit capital, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, as well as our TISMO and technology projects, they each had their own dedicated slice of the pie. So their own dedicated percentage of the available funds based on the 2045 MTP. So this is the policy we've been implementing over the past 5 years. So why is this so important? Why are we going to be spending the majority of 2025 talking about funding policy and funding scenarios? Well, this funding policy provides the structure through which we apply our prioritization methodology, and also how we annually program projects into both our TIP and the FDOT work program each year. Of our current approach, it allows us to fund a greater number of projects because we currently have a maximum funding limit of $4 million per project phase. So we can fund on average about 10 projects per year based on a $40 million budget on average. This policy also allows us to be able to fund a wider variety of projects because there is a dedicated funding source to each of those 4 different modal categories that we were just looking at on the previous slide. And this process also allows projects to flow seamlessly from the long-range plan into our prioritized project list and ultimately into the TIP and our work program to be able to maintain that planning consistency. And the structure of the funding policy that we establish for the 2050 plan is how all of the project needs are going to be organized in the long-range plan, but it also shapes the structure and how projects are shown in the PPL and TIP. So you can easily follow that project's progress from its initial concept through its construction and implementation. So as we look to 2050, we need to revisit this funding scenario to make sure that it fits with the region's goals and objectives and our vision for the next 25 years. So we're going to be asking some very poignant questions, including, are we looking at the right modal categories? Do we have the right slices of the pie? Should there be fewer or should there be more? Do we need to look at changes to the size of each of those slices? Should there be a change to the dedicated amount of funding to each of those different modal programs? So while these are very poignant questions and are going to require a lot of discussion from us this calendar year, we have been asking the public for their thoughts on this since we've started the development of the 2050 MTP last January of 2024. So as of the date we put this slide together, we had 380 responses. I've been told that's grown to over 430, so this will be updated soon. But based on when the slide was developed, of the 5 categories that we pro-offered, complete streets, active transportation, technology and TISMO, transit capital, as well as safety, all of these were seen as important by the public to consider within the new 2050 funding policy. Then we asked, how much money would you dedicate to each of those different categories if this was your policy to create by yourself? The public was able to distribute their imaginary $100 across each of our different categories. And we were able to see that the transit and safety elements received the highest amount of dedicated funding from the public's perspective at 30% and 21% respectively, followed by the complete streets, active transportation, TISMO, and then the other category. And that other category does have a lot of cross-pollination with the previous categories that we provided. So that is kind of covered within the other elements. So as we reviewed the detailed survey results from the public, the key themes were a strong emphasis on multimodal travel, as well as a desire to make sure that all of the modal programs are considered to provide transportation options, but a stronger preference for more dedicated funding for safety as well as transit within our region. And we've also asked these same questions to our technical partners, to your staff at each of our government agencies, and we received very similar feedback in that emphasis on multimodal travel and those travel options, and a desire to see dedicated funding for safety improvements within the region. Now, during our February MTP technical workshop, where we invite all of your staff and 130 of our closest friends within the region to do a deeper dive on these particular elements, there were a few additional items that we needed to clear up before we started developing funding policies. So we're going to talk through today what those questions were, the feedback that we received, and then the proposed actions that we're going to move forward with to develop those 2050 funding scenarios. So to get started, the first two questions focused on our modal categories, similar to what we were just talking about with the public feedback. And our first question is if MPO funding should be used to support goes with safety improvements on FDOT resurfacing projects throughout the region in the event that those safety elements could not have been added to the project work in any other way. And that was seen as very favorable by all of our participants, receiving 83% of support. The second question was a confirmation to make sure that we were setting aside funding for those safety improvements, both on the state highway system and off the state highway system. And that was also favorably received, receiving 76% of support from our technical partners throughout the region. So with these positive responses, we do plan on incorporating both of these categories in the first set of funding scenarios that you'll be able to see later this year. Our third question resulted in a mixed bag of responses. As you can see, we were split nearly down the middle. Should the MTP funding policy allow for MPO funding to support widening projects? And opinions were split on this, as you can tell from our survey results, throughout the region, with both the yeses and nos evenly distributed across our 3-county area, across each of our counties, cities and towns that were participating, and even within single agencies. There were both yeses and nos, showing that this is truly something that's a little bit divisive within our region. The only common theme that we noticed as we were diving really deep into the results of the survey and the feedback that we received was that traffic engineers were more likely to say yes to allow these funds to be used for widening than all other respondents. So based on this near even split, we are proposing to develop the funding scenarios to maintain the policy that we've had for the last 15 plus years to not use MPO or TMA funding to support widening projects. So as we evaluate the 2050 funding plan and the scenarios that we develop this year, we can revisit this topic as needed, but this is where we plan to start. Our fourth question was a bit more clear in its response. It was unanimously supported by all of our technical partners to increase that federal MPO funding maximum for projects within our region. So I mentioned that's currently set at a maximum of $4 million per project phase. And as we've experienced cost overages for all of our projects throughout the region, we need to acknowledge that that $4 million does not go as far as it used to. So our next organic question was, what should that new funding maximum be? And that's where the uncertainty came back into the conversation. Yes, it's different for every single agency. Each of the projects that we look at are varying in both scope and scale throughout our 3-county area. So it's hard to settle on one limit for everyone. So after discussing a lot of different ideas, the group settled on the desire to keep the limit as $4 million, as it's been historically, but to increase that limit by inflation based upon when that project is anticipated to move forward. So it would be a $4 million base plus inflation based upon the year that it's anticipated to be programmed. This is a strategy that we've been implementing as we program projects from our prioritized project list into the TIP and work program. So it's something that we're familiar with, we've done before, but we're going to be able to incorporate that more clearly into the 2050 MTP, so that we're seeing it from start to finish. Then our last discussion question resulted in a surprisingly even split of responses as well. The actual survey responses to this was really, well, let me back up. We were really focusing on making sure that we were asking, should there be a local agency match requirement to leverage MPO funding within the region? And in the survey results, the yeses all came with an asterisk. What would that mean? What would that look like? and uncertainty about how that could be implemented practically throughout the region. Again, recognizing the different scopes and scales of projects, but also the different scopes and scales of each of our agencies that are implementing those projects. The no's, on the other hand, were very clear. No, this is not a desired item to include in the funding scenarios. So with these results in mind, and knowing that historically a local agency match has not been a requirement for MPO funding for projects over the past 15 plus years, we are proposing to not include a local agency match requirement as part of the 2050 funding scenarios. So after we hammered out all of those details, we were able to kind of resettle in on what those initial scenario categories would be, those modal programs that will be considered within our 2050 funding scenarios. So you will see the safety category, along with a set aside for those goes with elements for our safety improvements on resurfacing projects, as well as complete streets, active transportation, transit capital, and our transportation systems management and operations and technology improvements. So now that we've discussed how we're going to put all these scenarios together, we're going to focus on when you're going to see them. And you've heard a couple mentions of this already this morning, but I'll remind everyone again. On April 9th, we're going to have our MPO Board and Committee Summit, where we're dedicating all of our time to evaluating and discussing the initial 2050 funding scenarios and looking at those tangible comparisons between those different items so we can get your feedback and recommendations to help build the next iteration of those funding scenarios. Throughout April and May at your committee meetings and as well as at the board meeting, we'll be summarizing the feedback that we've received both from the summit as well as the April technical workshop, which will have occurred within that same time period, and continue our discussions, reviewing the outcomes and discussing what the next iteration of funding scenarios should look like. So as we move into June and July, we're going to be incorporating the next round of feedback from our June technical workshop, as well as everything else that we've heard up to that point, and then work towards building consensus on that recommended or preferred funding scenario. So when we come back to you in August and September, you're previewing that draft 2050 MTP cost feasible plan, which is that recommended scenario. And all of that is work to be done and completed to support and plan for that adoption of the 2050 MTP in December of this year. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Does anyone have any questions?
Scott, Commissioner Kent.
Sorry, I have 3 questions. Hopefully they'll be quick. On the local agency match requirement, did you all explore something other than a requirement, but some sort of preference?
That was a discussion that came up at our TAC meeting just last week. So we do include local preference as part of our prioritization methodology.
Okay.
So the projects that bubble up to the top of the list are those that are seen as high priority by locals.
Okay. On the cap at the 4 million, what has been when was the last time that cap was raised? What is it been raised annually or every 5 years? When was it last raised?
I believe it was last discussed during the 2045 MTP's development 5 years ago. And since then, with the implementation of that, I don't quite recall when it came up before that point. That has been something that we've been implementing as a $4 million base plus inflation. It was just never documented that way in the 2045 cost feasible plan. So that's something we're going to be continuing with strategy wise, $4 million plus inflation to include in the 2050 cost feasible plan.
But they're not going to raise the base over time. It's just per project, 4 million, and then chases the project with the CPI.
Based on the feedback that we've received so far, yes, but that is something that we continue to revisit through the MTP process naturally.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we're clear. It's per project phase. And
Yes.
that was a change
Sorry.
from in our 2045, something that we revisited about 5 years ago. Prior to that, it was 4 million per project, all phases. So you design a project, there's, 500 to 1,000 to 1 million. If you require, right of way, that could really, change a project's future. So it was updated to 4 million per phase. And that was something imposed by our technical advisory committee Something else that we also consider, as it relates to that, is our total funding that we have on any given year. It's about $40 million. So as we're dividing that, trying to, develop projects across the region, as Taylor mentioned, as we're developing projects with our local partners, we're also trying to develop smaller projects to align with that kind of implementation approach. So if things do go awry and things do balloon, they're reasonable. We're not kind of starting with mega projects to begin with, given that we have such limited resources from the get-go. But just wanted to make sure we clarified, it's 4 million per phase on most of our projects. That's probably $6 to $8 million per project. And again, that ranges. Each project's different. If you're reconstructing a road to add, a trail alongside versus if you're, improving intersection, mast arms and replacing the box and the technology, has different costs. But that's where we did have some consensus, and using the year of expenditure as part of our planning process. That was already a requirement, but what you will see is, that being implemented in the estimation process. Will actually, in some cases, projects later in the plan will double, in some cases, the project cost accordingly.
Thank you. And lastly, you had a question about using the funds on widening projects, but there was a qualifier if they included bike and pedestrian.
Yes. Mhm.
And that confused me. It didn't seem like that should have been broken out into two. Do you have a subset of that and a more detailed analysis of that we could maybe get via email?
We didn't ask that specific separate question because we were trying to stay in line with our complete streets policy and the existing policy to not use funding for widening projects. Allowing the addition of lanes in addition to kind of standard complete streets types elements was already kind of expanding the existing policy and making some significant changes.
That requires them to include pedestrian and bike component?
The complete streets policy as it stands now includes those projects that are typically roadway reconstructions, maintaining the same number of lanes, but there could be access management changes, turn lane additions, lengthenings, shortenings, but that would also include bicycle and pedestrian considerations as well. Mhm. Thank you. Oh, no.
That's
This is
what
meant
we're
for
here for.
discussion. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just have one. So, you're talking about the funding, is all the funding for this year of 2025 captured, or are we still dependent on other funds from the government coming in for this project?
Mhm. So in terms of this fiscal year 2025 and what we're going to be starting later this year for fiscal year 2026, all of that funding has been allocated to projects, and that's documented within our transportation improvement program. As we look to the 2050 plan, that first year that we're really going to be seeing new projects get started will be fiscal year 2032. So we're always planning a minimum of 5 years in advance.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, so when you were showing the first tech survey, there was like 48% no's. Did you get, and I think you might have said something about it, and I didn't really capture it, might hear it well. Was there any reason for all the no's?
Which question
It
were you referring
was
to?
the first
Let me
one, it
jump
was
back
like
to it.
40, right? Was no, 46%. Yeah, that's when you were just chatting about.
Mhm.
That's an oddly framed question.
Yeah. That's kind of just seeing if there was anything deeper into that way though.
If you have specific questions, I can dive down deeper into the survey results. We had a lot of free response answers in the discussion elements. The full discussion that we had with our technical workshop participants is posted on our YouTube channel, so it can be seen in full context as well.
Oh.
Mhm.
I apologize. Just a quick editorial on this one, kind of the question prompt. So we've done a couple different surveys and polls with our technical workshop. And this was one that kind of came in as an outlier. We kept some open response questions in some of our early surveys. And this kind of unprompted, how else would you want to see the money spent? And it was widening projects. So, let's kick the tires a little more on this particular one. As Taylor mentioned, our complete streets policy, and partially because of our limited federal funds on how much a widening project costs, excludes the use of the MPO TMA funds for widening projects. So this came up as, we're at an inflection point here. Let's revisit the policy. And it kind of came in this way. And some of it's complete streets. We all have a different vision, and what that means. To Metro Plan's policy, it's keep maintaining and or reducing the roadway capacity to add other safety, systems management, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. So this one was kind of like the slippery slope of, could it be a complete street if it's a 4-lane road with a nice median and access management, if we also add a sidewalk? So imagine the current cross section is just a rural kind of 2-lane, but that future vision is a 4-lane with a median and wide sidewalks and lighting. Is that still a complete street? In the eye of the beholder, right? But as we're trying to stay true to policy, the projects are those excluding adding lanes as part of the project. There are other funding sources to pursue for that, if that's the prerogative. But this was for that specific amount of federal funds. So a little more context. And that's why I would say, as Taylor hinted at, the vote was 50-50. When we look at our technical partners, it's a blend of your city planners and engineers, those from your planners, from community development. And then we also have our traffic engineers focused on throughput. So that, I would say, is very representative in the data and also the paradigm on the solution. So I think we have some interesting kind of chat remarks as well that kind of contextualize what I just kind of, summarized. But sorry for the long-winded one on that. But even though this is how it shook out, based on the comments, it made it even more clear to maintain policy as is, which was the not for widening projects.
Anyone else? I believe you're still on the next round, so if you'll, Ms. Laurent, you still have the floor.
This is where my teasing remark of, I'm going to be up here a little while. I'll be two of your presenters today. So I'm presenting on behalf of Slade Downs. He's out of the office today, but to provide you with an update on our Tracking the Trends program. So Tracking the Trends is a program designed to track the historic data in transportation and identify trends within our region. Got excited. So like other MPOs, we do choose the metrics that are tracked. We always make sure to include our federal performance measures, but we go a little bit further to track additional data points within our region specific to our area to know how they intersect with transportation. So the full Tracking the Trends program includes 4 key components, which are shown here in our graph, well, 3 in our graphic. The area profile and transportation highlights, so that Tracking the Trends overview and area profile, the data library, the accessibility hub, and the systems performance dashboard. So you can access each of these 4 different components from that single link that we have here on the slide. That was also included in your agenda packets for quick reference. Now I'm going to highlight what each of these different items are, so you can start taking advantage of them and share them with your staff as well. So beginning with the first, the area profile and transportation highlights section. This is an overview of the characteristics of our region and highlighting the sections that show the selected indicators and metrics, both from those federal items, but also key items from our past 2045 plan, where there were specific trends that we wanted to make sure we tracked over the coming years. So this entire experience is curated to be about a 5-minute shallow dive into the transportation trends within our region. And examples of some of this information that's include changes in population. You can see we have an interactive slider bar graphic for people to be able to see how that change has happened over time. Looking at changes in safety data and how that's been improving over the past 5 years. Then also looking at how daily vehicle miles traveled has changed, which has been a resurgence from pre-COVID levels. So we're back to the status quo before that disruption. The data library is the deep dive version of our transportation metrics. This is where we have a data clearinghouse of over 150 different transportation-related metrics. It's intended for you and your staff to be able to use at your leisure. It's a single one-stop shop to be able to download a lot of this information rather than hunting it down as we do from the myriad of different sources online. And it allows you to kind of skip the process of asking us for the data, saying, we saw this on the area highlight, can I have this information? It's always open and available for everyone to be able to download directly and save a little bit of time in terms of that data collection effort. Next, we have the Systems Performance Dashboard. This interactive dashboard is the one-stop shop for federally mandated performance measures. So those items that Alex and Laura were presenting on at your last meeting. That's where we set those targets for those performance measures. And then this dashboard is where we track how things are actually going compared to those targets. The dashboard features metrics as well as interactive maps to be able to visualize how those different performance measures vary across our region. And then the last update to the Tracking the Trends program is the addition of our Accessibility Hub. The Accessibility Hub is, well, let me define that first. Accessibility is how we define how easy it is to reach a destination or some sort of point of interest. And we have the ones that are included within our tool shown here on the slide. For example, a neighborhood with lots of parks or restaurants and other services nearby would be shown as having higher accessibility to those locations. But a gated community with only one entrance or some sort of limiting transportation factor would likely have lower accessibility scores because it's a longer trip to be able to get to those locations. So this hub will allow both you as our partners and citizens alike to see how accessible different areas are within the region. And these accessibility maps are available to many different points of interest, again shown here on the slide, with higher scores indicating that a location is more accessible to these selected points of interest and lower scores meaning that it's a little harder to get to. So you can also explore this information from the opposite perspective, pointing out areas where there are lower scores, that lower accessibility. So you can have this information ready available to identify needs within our areas and identify those, provide additional information for decision making. So this is a quick high-level overview of our Tracking the Trends program. All of it is already published on our website, available at that link in your agenda packets. I recommend checking it out, and if you have any hard questions, please send them to Slade Downs, and I'll address whatever the easy ones are today. Do we have any questions this morning?
Anyone? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we have up Mr. Hill with the update on EV readiness study. Welcome, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee members. This is a final presentation on our EV readiness study. I've been updating you on this project as we've made progress. And real quick, here are the tasks. We did an assessment of electric vehicle supply and equipment. We had topic-specific workshops. This is a little different in that we wanted to have a little bit more discussion on topics affecting electric vehicles and their use here in our region. And then we did an analysis on charging infrastructure. These are the locations where you can charge, and then a public outreach. Next step is looking at how we want to monitor how this progresses, how this changes over in the future. So the assessment, real quick, EV 101, there are battery electric vehicles, there are plug-ins, which again, as they say, you can plug these in to supply within your home or at locations within the area. You have hybrid electric vehicles, which use braking to recharge the batteries, and then you have fuel cell electric vehicles. Our work focused on the top two charging vehicles, not the hybrid electric vehicles. So the infrastructure, just like internal combustion engines, you can go to locations and you can charge your vehicles. There are 3 different levels. Level 1 is old, is phasing out, and that's a very slow charge. Level 2, a little bit faster, and you can do this either at home or a public facility. And then fast charge, that's usually located in limited access roadways where people are traveling a distance, they want to stop, get a fast charge and get back on the way. I'll say this now, I'll get to this later. There is a significant difference in cost as well as maintenance of level 2 chargers and level 3 fast chargers. Difference in cost, difference in maintenance. So that's a question that any jurisdiction or any private entity makes when they want to develop one of these locations. In terms of the planning context, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, this was a federal program, and this is funding that went mostly to the states to develop charging infrastructure on limited access roadways. Most of the local governments have some discussion of charging facilities in their comprehensive plans. In terms of the regional context, depending, the type of charging facility depends on the use of the vehicle, the land use, as well as ownership. So in terms of the land use, residents versus commercial or businesses versus tourist locations, you're going to have level 2 charging in most instances. In terms of travel pattern, for people who are commuting every day, they can either charge at home or they can charge like here in our garage. Now, the thing about that is, like, most of us have a vehicle, and right now that car is just sitting somewhere. It's not being used. So there's an opportunity for you to charge the vehicle. As opposed to, again, if you're doing some long distance traveling, then a fast charger is probably what you want to use. In terms of ownership, if you own a home, you can probably charge at home. But if you are living in an apartment or a location where you're sharing residence, then you're going to have a little challenge with getting to a charge there and then how that's being used. Because if it's a level 2, someone's going to have to leave their car there to be charged. And then you're going to have to wait in line if there's not additional ports. And that's something that we want to try and address and encourage our jurisdictions to overcome. Infrastructure. We've developed an inventory of charging locations within our region. Excuse me. Disadvantaged communities, what we're referring here is low-income minority communities where the existence of electric vehicles are limited. A lot of that's due to cost. Some of it's due to being able to charge. And just understanding how electric vehicles operate and how you maintain them. EV policies, most of the jurisdictions have some code or regulation on how you can deploy charging facilities in your jurisdiction. And then the last item there is Florida Bill 1084, which is a piece of legislation that I tend to support because it's trying to develop some uniformity across the region and across the state in terms of how charging equipment is implemented and how it's operated. In terms of the future of charging or electric vehicles in our region, this is just a projection. When we started this work, I can assure you that it's changed more recently, but that mustard colored area there is what we used or what we identified as the projection for our area in terms of electric vehicle ownership and adoption. And we use some information from FDOT as well as some national organizations to make this projection. But part of the projection included the fact that there was incentives to purchasing electric vehicles. And so, again, in the future, because of these incentives, people would buy electric vehicles and be more conscious of the environment. So again, that has changed. The workshops. So the utility workshop, we had Florida Power, Duke, Orlando Utilities, and Kissimmee Utilities participate in this. And what they shared with us is that there's a need for consistent permitting across county lines. They wanted more control over the networks because some of these networks are private entities and they would like to have access to the information so that they can determine charging rates. Concern of communication with FDOT in terms of where they're developing or putting their charging facilities in. And at the beginning of this work, they encouraged Metro Plan Orlando to go after one of the federal discretionary grants for implementing charging facilities. And again, this was early in the work, and we kind of bowed out of that because we weren't sure what we were asking for. So it was important to know what you're going to ask for. And at that point, we really didn't know because we were early in the study. The policy workshop, charging infrastructure and investment, we sent out invitations to all of our committees to participate in these. Again, from the policy perspective, most of the jurisdictions have some language in their comprehensive plans on electric vehicle charging equipment. Some of the challenges that we discussed, parking, where are they located in terms of parking facilities? And then that concept of if you park your car and you're charging, you need to come and you need to move your car once it's charged so someone else can charge it. So how do you deal with that? Maintenance and operations. A lot of the literature talks about, you go to charge your vehicle and they don't work or they're broken. That's an issue because you're traveling a distance and you need to charge. You want to know that when you go to charge, it's going to work. So how do you deal with that? I mentioned the trade-off between level 2 and direct charge, fast charging, and that is a difference in terms of the equipment as well as the expense. In terms of infrastructure, data sharing and partnerships with the utilities and charging providers is what the participants highlighted as an area that we need to do more work in. Understanding anticipated land use, and then integrating the latest data in understanding or having that infrastructure information. We did have one of our participants who is a Tesla owner, and he said that he has information on where all the Tesla charging locations are. And that's something that we left out of the information we had, so we did include it, or it's been included. In terms of investments, real quick, there was a lot of funding available for this, but I don't think that's going to be available in the future. And as a jurisdiction, you need to understand what role you want to play in this. Do you want yourselves to be the owner and operator of this charging equipment, or do you want to partner with the private entity and bring them in? And again, the budgeting part, these are projects. So there's the capital expense, and then there is the maintenance expense that you have to be mindful of. Going back to some of those gaps in terms of the infrastructure, the graph on the left shows you where the level 2 charging locations are that we've identified, and a quarter mile or half mile buffer, which we consider, easy 15-minute walk. And then on the right is where we have those gaps where we need to put charging infrastructure in. Some of these are multi-housing units. Again, if you're living in an apartment and there's 1 or 2 charging stations, who decides or how do you manage someone going and charging and leaving their car overnight when you need to charge? So how do you deal with that? The consultant, Kittleson, that worked on this with us, developed this tool, and it's just a tool to help the jurisdictions to identify where they would need to put some charging facilities. Of course, you want to make sure you can have the electric supply, determine the ownership. Is it you, the jurisdiction, or is it a private interest? Resilience. Want to make sure that they always work. And one of the questions we had is what happens in a storm or a hurricane? Well, that is a challenge. And it's not just a challenge for electric vehicle supply equipment. It's also a challenge for, fueling an internal combustion engine, because those pumps work on electricity too. Connectivity with other modes, and then making sure that you have the demand, that the population is there to use your equipment, or else it's just going to sit idle. I know the city of Apopka they were early adopters in putting in a charging facility, and it wasn't being used. So there's an investment that's just sitting there. Okay, public outreach. We had initially included a survey in this work, but our communication team was already doing a transportation survey for the region. So we just brought information that they collected or inserted a question that we could use in our work. And it was just to understand the interest in electric vehicles. And I would imagine that at the time of this survey, again, there was incentives for people to buy these vehicles. And that's waned. So while there was interest as a result of the survey shows that, again, this is going to change it, I believe. So next steps, we want to monitor this, and these are just the metrics that we've identified that we want to keep track of as we move into the future, as we can complete our metropolitan transportation plan. And just so we are, again, stay aware or stay up to date on this information. Lastly, all this, the report, the final report will be on our website. And we do have these fact sheets because a lot of this is, we did this because we want to be or provide a resource, not only to our stakeholders, but to the traveling public on electric vehicles. Because there still is a lot of information unknown about electric vehicles. It's getting out there, starting to trickle out a lot better now. But in terms of how you can use them, how you can't use them, again, that whole notion of what vehicles can be charged and what vehicles can't be charged and when you can charge them. Level 2 charging versus direct charge, fast charge. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions or comments.
Any questions for Mr. Hill?
I have a small one, but I always have a question, I guess. So, you know, you discussed challenges, right? And for now, we control what we do here in the Metro Plan area. That being said, you know, what I've seen from the state and the federal government, especially the federal government, is a push not to support the EV vehicles. And in fact, I believe that the federal government is doing away with their plan to support any charging stations and stuff that I think the Biden administration has established. So, I mean, that being said, and do you really see that, you know, this is attainable in the future? So we're looking at, and with that being said, do you still think that we're still going to have an increase and that we will be able to still be able to get out and financially fund this project?
So you're talking about not this study, but you're talking about the adoption of electric vehicles.
Well, I'm talking about the charging stations you want to put everywhere.
Yeah, that's got to be
With the funding.
Yeah, that's going to change because again, the incentives that were under the Biden administration, that was helping increase the adoption of electric vehicles. Now with the change, if you don't have electric vehicles, well, you don't need the charging supply. Now there's still people who own electric vehicles, and no doubt people will still purchase them. And so again, there's got to be that understanding the demand and the market. That tool that Kilson put together to identify one of the variables is population. So how many vehicles do you have in your community, and you know where is the demand, and people who own electric vehicles, do they own a home? In which case they can charge at home. Do they work in a location where they can charge the vehicle? In our garage, we do have charging locations. So the demand may slow in terms of the adoption of electric vehicles. And again, that's kind of have to, when you're talking about the charging equipment, you're going to have to pay close attention to where the demand is, existing ownership. You know, there's a whole lot of variables that go into that. And so the market analysis has to be clear.
Yeah, that's just kind of my concern is, you know, if we're planning on putting all these charging stations in, is there going to be a demand for it by the time we kind of get the plan rolling and going?
Yeah.
Are we wasting money? And I support EV vehicles, and you know, in fact, I have a hybrid, so you know, I'm in favor of it. But I'm just wondering, is this something that we really need to keep a close eye on and say, are we really putting our money where, you know, there's a need for it?
So we do have the metrics that we want to keep track of. Okay. And I was going to comment that, you know, my understanding is that the hybrid is the sweet spot, if you will, between a gas powered engine and an electric vehicle. As a consumer, that's kind of like the sweet spot where you want to get to. And that's where the market seems to be going.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any others? Commissioner Kennedy?
I'm gonna take it easy on you on the EV question. Um, I think money should be spent on public transportation. I know the commercial fleets are doing LNG, so I think that's a moot point. But what I am gonna ask, I have a lot of experience as a consultant to the oil and gas industry. And there are significant safety requirements at gas stations, environmental, public safety. You didn't mention any of that. Is that a component of the requirements that you're developing for these EV stations?
So what we're doing here is we're trying to provide the resources for jurisdictions, okay, as they start to consider either developing these charging facilities or partner with a private interest. And so, yeah, there are regulations, just like with gas pumps, there are regulations, local, state codes that you have to meet. And I would imagine that's how it will happen, okay? Now, we didn't go that far into details. We do have an appendix that includes a lot of information that your staff can use as you consider, again, either building one or developing one, or again, partnering with private interests. Mhm. Well, not only the safety requirements, but again, what I was focusing on is the investment perspective. Okay, so there's the fast charge. Is it going to be used? Number one, because it's more expensive and more expensive to maintain. So is that what you want? Is from a jurisdiction perspective? Is that what you want to deploy, or is it you just want to do level 2 charging facilities? Less maintenance, chances are it's going to be used. The challenge for the jurisdiction is, how do you monitor it so that it's not being abused? And I make reference to the fact that as I used to be a father of children, now I'm a father of adult people. But when they were in daycare, I was always reminded, you need to come pick up your child or we're going to penalize you. And so that's something you need to consider as a way of managing use. Thank you for taking it easy on me.
Any other questions? Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Dallas. Is there any kind of standardization recommendations across municipalities? And for example, our city installed chargers quite a while ago, and they were free. But eventually we had to bring the demand in line with supply. So we came up with our own charging cost system. But it seems like it would be very useful for at least some recommended standards for municipalities to use when they install chargers.
Standards on the cost or standard on the actual deployment?
For the cost and availability primarily.
Right. I would imagine that as you approach or as you're doing this, well, first of all, yeah, there are some standards. And again, we do have some appendix that have information on how your staff can go about doing that analysis. But this Florida bill, again, that's part of what its intent. It's passed last year. Now it's got to be implemented. And that's why I mentioned I kind of like this, because it wants to have that consistency, across jurisdictions. And again, is your neighboring jurisdiction is considering deployment. You also want to probably have some conversation with them on how they are going about it, and how it can be used as you go about deploying these facilities. And again, there's a lot of jurisdictions around the country that are doing this. There's a lot of information on, the cost, the businesses, because there are several private entities that will deploy. They'll come in and partner with you and they'll put in the charging facilities. And it's just like any other vendor, you have probably some idea on how much it's going to cost and how much it's going to cost to maintain. So the information's available, and I hope I answered your question.
If I may follow up, is the information evolving into regulatory ways that municipalities would install their own systems? Or is it more recommended procedures on how they do that?
Very good question. I'd suggest that it's being regulated. And again, that's part of the legislation to make sure that everyone is consistent. And you don't have what we have now, where this jurisdiction can go about it a certain way and this jurisdiction does it differently. So again, that's part of the legislation. And because again, this is being done across the country, the information is available.
Very much.
And as I mentioned, the report is not on our website now, but it will be this month. So some of those questions you ask Commissioner Sullivan, your staff or yourself, you can glean through some of that.
Okay, any other
Thank you.
questions? Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, general information. There are several items under general information at tab 3 in your agenda packet to please take a look at that. The next Metro Plan Orlando board meeting will be Wednesday, March 12th at 9 a.m. Our next MAC meeting, mark your calendars, is May 8th at 9:30. At this time, do we have any committee members who want to make any final comments or announcements? I have one. Mark your calendars, March 20th is Tri-County League of Cities meeting for all the municipalities. And now we're at public comments. If any members of the public wish to comment, please use the raise hand function and you will be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll unmute your mic after you are recognized. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comment to 2 minutes or less. Do we have anyone joining us virtually who would like to make a comment?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any hands on the virtual side.
And do we have anyone here locally?
No, we do not.
And any written comments?
Nope.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks everybody for coming. And welcome to Commissioner Bobrowski for her first meeting with us.
The remarkable tablet that has an app, but I think Amazon has the Kindle Scribe. Very similar.
There is